Well, welcome to Honor in Westeros. So hopefully you're at the right panel. Thank you for being here. It is 11 a.m. on a Friday morning. Hope you guys are having a good con so far. We are going to be talking about what honor is in Westeros, and that is a huge topic. We could probably go on for several hours, but we only have 1 hour, so we're going to do the best we can. But we're going to be talking about how it's defined in Westeros and how different characters embody this tricky concept of honor. So I am Lauren, a.k.a. ShakespeareofThrones. Some of you might know me from Twitter. And with me today are...
I'm Wendy. You might know me as Wendy Nerd from Tumblr, Wendy Nerd Writes.
And I'm Stephen Stark. Might know me from Twitter, YouTube. A guy with an opinion.
As are all of us. So first I just want to open it up with a question. What is honor? Just take a second to think about that. And Wendy, do you have any idea of, like, how would you define honor if you could define it?
It's basically a set of ethics and a code of how to adhere to them. And it tends to be, like, in Westeros especially, it tends to be particularly patriarchal. Like, most of the time when discussions of honor are brought up, they're usually brought up around male characters and male characters talking about their honor. So
that's interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's basically how I see it.
I guess I would say that honor is sort of the metric of public perception. And yeah, I'll get into a little bit more about what I mean about that later, but the idea that one's honor is tied to how people perceive you, not necessarily just your actions, but what people know about what you've done and how they view it.
Jamie.
Yeah,
I
I think that's really interesting that you bring up that public perception because to me, like when I think about honor in A Song of Ice and Fire, I think of how there are these different sides to it. There's what it means to you personally, your personal code of honor and how that looks in your private life, and also how that looks in your public life too. And it's funny how different characters will perceive a certain character as being really honorable, too honorable. Who am I talking about here? Ned Stark. And then that person might not actually be honorable when you examine some of their actions, but it is so different depending on what character you're looking at and what choices they're making too. It's this very fluid concept that we can get really philosophical about really fast, and I think that maybe we will touch on a bit of that philosophical aspect of honor a little bit in this panel. So how many of you think that honor can be defined? Nobody. Oh, wow. Okay, great. So we're going to have a good time.
I think a lot of it is interesting is how it intersects with like a lot of philosophical questions about what is good, what is morals, what is ethics, and how those questions are sort of interchangeable almost, or treated as interchangeable rather.
Mm-hmm, for sure. So I think that how we're going to do this is we're just going to talk about some things that we are each interested in regarding the concept of honor in A Song of Ice and Fire. And then we're going to open it up to talking about different characters that we didn't touch on in that discussion. And then we're going to open it up to questions. So I will get started. So I think that the character that I just mentioned, Ned Stark, he's kind of like our gold standard of honor, right? He's honorable, Stark patriarch, right? And I think it's really interesting how A Game of Thrones kind of orbits around him and his struggles with honor. And then we have him set up as this, like he has this philosophical legacy, I think, that he passes on to characters throughout the rest of A Song of Ice and Fire. Like we see Jaime and Stannis and definitely Jon struggling with the same things that Ned struggles with in A Game of Thrones. Like his legacy and his conflicts live on through these other characters. And I find that so interesting, especially through a comparative literary analysis perspective, because George R. R. Martin has said that he loves Shakespeare and especially Julius Caesar and Richard III, and When I heard that he quoted Julius Caesar as one of his favorite plays, I started looking more into it and reading it again and realizing, wow, holy shit, there is a lot of Julius Caesar in A Song of Ice and Fire, especially in A Game of Thrones and Ned's arc and how he struggles with honor and doing the honorable thing. But I don't even think that Ned sees it as doing the honorable thing, but really doing the right thing. And I think that we sometimes get those ideas conflated, doing what's right with doing what's honorable. And then it goes back to that personal moral code. And like we see how in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, we see how Brutus struggles with whether to kill Caesar and stop him from being a dictator and help save the Roman people from this potential terrible fate of living under a dictator. But Julius Caesar is also his friend, and he doesn't want to go along with this conspiracy to kill his friend. So he has this struggle between public and private loyalties. And now when you think about that conflict and then you think about Ned Stark, it's like, well, wait a minute. Ned Stark doesn't have that kind of conflict at all. He's not plotting to kill Robert Baratheon. In fact, he's trying to stop a conspiracy from happening against his friend. But so he's kind of set up as the anti-Brutus in a way, but then again, he's also sticking so close to his personal ethics, his personal morals, and his idea of mercy and saving children, that a lot of these values get in the way of doing what's really best for the kingdom and doing his job, executing his office as Hand of the King the best way that he can. And in his final chapter with Varys, when Varys visits him in the Black Cells, there's even this acknowledgement that Ned may have killed Robert Baratheon through his mercy. So that's really interesting to think about in the context of Julius Caesar, Brutus, who deliberately killed Caesar, and then Ned, who did not deliberately kill Robert Baratheon, but is still struggling with the idea, oh my goodness, holy shit, like my values might have, my inability to balance my values might have led to Robert Baratheon's death. So that is really interesting to me, and how George R. R. Martin sets up that parallel, and it's not directly like copy and pasted into Ned's arc. Like, he's definitely a very different character from Brutus, but they still have those same struggles with honor and ethics. And then we see that in characters moving forward, like I mentioned, Jaime and Stannis and Jon, certainly, who has a very blatant parallel scene to the scene in Julius Caesar where Caesar is stabbed. We see that scene play out very similarly in Jon's arc. So that, yeah, and I also wanted to read off a question and answer from the So Spake Martin archives, where he kind of alludes to this. There's somebody who wrote, "Mr. Martin, please forgive me for disturbance. An interesting argument cropped up, one that only you can resolve." And Martin says, "But I don't like to resolve arguments. I prefer to stir them up." Because of course he does. And the person goes on, "Namely, one of the posters claims that if Tyrion had been an honorable man, such as Ned, he would have used his position as the acting hand to open the gates of King's Landing to Stannis, and would have subsequently testified against Cersei and Joff, if they got a trial, that is. He would have done so because a lawful succession and justice for the murders of Robert and Ned and many others should have been the major priority for a man of honor and responsibility. Would such a course of action be considered honorable and right in Westerosi society?" And then Martin goes on to answer, "By whom? Westeros doesn't have the Gallup poll. This is a sort of question people would need to decide for themselves, just as in real life. 2,000 years after the assassination of Julius Caesar, People are still debating whether or not that was an honorable act. Dante put Brutus and Cassius in the lowest level of hell for what they did, right next to Judas Iscariot, but Shakespeare wrote that Brutus was the noblest Roman of them all. So argue on. And I really like how George frames that as, it's more something to continue asking yourself. These questions of honor, who is an honorable person? I think there's more meaning in the questions than in the answers. So, I don't know. What do you guys think? What do you think about Ned?
Well, I think for one thing, it's a question of consequentialism, and I think consequentialism is one of the major framing devices of our discussions of Ned in particular, but also with Jamie too. Although I don't want to open it up too much. But
no, go ahead. We've got plenty of time.
Like Varys says to him, like, well, what about the people? What about the wars that are going to be started because of this and everything? Like, and it's an interesting point because he told Cersei, he was following his code of ethics, but it could have, because of that, like, that opened up the War of the Five Kings basically, and it caused like the deaths of like so many people, and it didn't really. Like, telling Cersei really didn't do anything good except for, like, maybe, like, 4 people were benefited from that. And you have to consider that, like, what about, you can talk about Ned's personal code of ethics, but what about his position as Hand of the King and as a lord and everything, like, a person who has obligations to the people of Westeros? And you got to wonder, what about his honor to them, like, his looking out for their safety? Isn't that more valuable than Cersei and Joffrey and Myrcella and Tommen? And, maintaining peace in Westeros, you can argue is like could be considered a more honorable thing than, saving their lives. And that's like, because there's going to be a huge war that's going to break out, obviously, over the succession unless he gets rid of them, like, quickly and quietly. And that's not what he chose to do. So I feel like with the Code of Honor, like, you have Ned Stark the person, but you also have Ned Stark the, like, civil servant, basically. And I think, like, you can actually say that as a civil servant, he violated a code of honor even because of the consequences of his actions. So he was putting the welfare of a very privileged few over just the mass amount of people that were negatively impacted. Not just his own family and everything, but also just straight up, like, little Tommy Cheapside or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that something that we have to consider too is the life that Ned had leading up to his position as Hand of the King, and how his trauma has informed his sense of honor and his actions that he took.
Little broken skulls inside velvet. Like, yeah.
Yeah, he had to save the children. Like, that's just his thing since Robert's Rebellion. And I don't know. It's like, did he have a choice? That's a question that I also keep coming back to. Like, is our sense of honor sometimes not really a matter of personal choice? It's like we've all been informed by actions of our past and nurture and nature and all of that.
Well, I think he's had a choice. I don't think it's a question of did he have a choice, but if he felt he had a choice.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to put it.
For 20 minutes too.
What do you think, Stephen?
Yeah.
Okay, well, get ready for a hot take. Ned is, again, he's held up as the example of the most honorable character in the story. But he maintains his honor based on a lie. And I think we can all agree on that, right? So I wanted to do this panel because I love examining the nature of honor and ethics and morality and that type of thing. And the fact is that Ned is considered honorable because people don't know what he did. Jamie, on the other side of that coin, is considered extremely dishonorable because they don't know why he did what he did, which makes, to me, it makes honor very much about the way your society regards you. And we'll remember Ned in the Black Cells saying something to the effect of, do you think my life is so precious that I would trade my honor for a few more years? Well, he wasn't willing to trade his honor. You know, he lied about John. He lied to John, lied to his wife. We can agree that these are probably not morally sound decisions, but he's still held up as that paragon of honor because people don't know the truth. And if they did, he would not be considered honorable. And if people knew the truth about what happened between Jaime and the Mad King, Jaime might be regarded as one of the greatest heroes of the Seven Kingdoms.
Well, that's true, but if he had, like, he was trying to save the lives of Joffrey and Myrcella and Tommen, and if he had stepped the wrong way or said something before all of that, what he worried most is that they would die.
Yeah.
And if that had happened, would we see him as honorable? I mean, and then we see sort of this conflict continue in, like, Stannis, who's willing to, well, we'll see. I don't know. Do we all think that Shireen is going to burn in the books? That he's going to? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Well,
It's safe to
they
say.
basically confirmed it.
Right. I know they did.
And Elio and Linda confirmed it too. So.
Well, sure. I know that there are a lot of people who are like, well, wait, it's going to be Melisandre's call, and Stannis isn't going to have much to do with it. So, assuming that he has control over that decision, and we already see him struggling with it in the books. What's the life of one child against a million of, I forgot the exact quote, but
Against the
if
kingdom,
I must
think.
sacrifice one to save a million from the dark, or something like that, right? It's something like that. And then for Ned, it's the exact opposite. You know, I am, to hell with everybody. I want to save these children. I mean, that's not exact quotes either, but kind of the gist, right? And we are supposed to ask ourselves as readers, well, what is more honorable? Can we get an answer?
That, I think, is one of the great aspects of this story, is that it leads us to a point where we can have this conversation. George has written it so beautifully where we can look at Ned and say, honorable, also not. We can look at Jaime and say, honorable, also not. We can look at Stannis and say the same thing. And so many of the really great characters have that dichotomy of they're considered mostly honorable because their skeletons are unknown, or they did something, maybe the ends didn't justify the means in the eyes of Westeros society, so they have shit for honor.
Yeah, and that dichotomy is a huge thing. I mean, we see dualities all throughout, competing dualities all throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, it's in the title, Ice and Fire, and it's all about achieving balance and maybe even a synthesis of these opposite ends of the spectrum. So that's definitely what we see. Like, Ned set up this conflict pretty well in the first book, and from there on out, we see just about every main character struggle with some inner sense of honor and conflicting loyalties there. So,
I'd like to ask the audience a question real quick, and then we'll get to you.
Yes.
Who thinks that Ned is unequivocally honorable? There's a few of you out there. We'll debate later. Who thinks that Jaime is unequivocally dishonorable? Oh, that's surprising me. That's surprising. Not one hand. Interesting. Okay.
So wait, hold on.
But he tried to kill a kid. I'm not supposed to.
Hey, raise your hand then.
Well, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to.
We're panelists.
Are you is he unequivocally dishonorable?
Okay, so that means that we could argue that he is honorable.
I think that argument can be made on some level.
Of course, he has a certain honor. So I wouldn't say he's unequivocally dishonorable.
I'd like to hear your question now, though.
Just I want to bring up that you're talking about how things are very complicated. With Ned, it's even more complicated because we would agree that keeping your promises would be honorable. So all of his dishonorable actions were based on keeping his promise to Lyanna.
Right.
And we could debate if
Right, but that's
and it ties in well with Jaime and his speech about keeping all the oaths.
right.
But we don't know the problem is that we don't know the exact contents. We don't know the exact contents of Lyanna. Did she actually go, okay, you can't tell a soul, or did she just say, promise me you'll protect him? And then that opens up a whole bunch of new questions about the actions Ned took when adhering to his promise, because we don't know exactly what the contents of that promise was.
Yeah, I seem to think that he put in a lot of that context himself. It almost doesn't matter exactly what she said, but when he saw Rhaegar's other children, or Aegon at least, or was it both of them brought into the Hall at King's Landing? Yeah, into the Red Keep, and they're all bloody and everything, and like he can't even finish his thought, his flashback when he's thinking about it. To me, like that's what he is working so hard to prevent for the rest of his life.
We had a question from our friend.
I want to say one thing, and I intended to do this with you. When the audience has a comment or a question, I might repeat it because they're recording the audio and you won't be heard otherwise.
Lessons learned from previous cons.
Right.
All right, our friend in gray over there.
Yeah, so people always talk about like the Stark honor, but like I don't know before Ed or Ned of any real examples of Stark being honorable, and it feels like Aaron is like as high as honor.
Okay.
Yes.
So the comment is Ned Stark is held up as a paragon of honor, and the Starks are, but it seems to originate with Ned, and there doesn't seem to be much historicity of Stark honor before that. Okay.
Rickard Stark had southern ambitions. Lyanna Stark broke her promises and ran off with a married man. And Brandon Stark, we know he deflowered someone. Like, I hate to bring that up, but like, even if he wasn't the one behind Ashar's Dane's dishonor, and I think we should at some point talk about like feminine honor versus male honor, but he was responsible for Barbary Dustin being pissed off at the Starks for the rest of her life. Well, one of the reasons. So, like, that is definitely a really important point, is that people keep talking about the Stark honor. It's just the Stark thing. It's like, they're not the ones with honor in their title. Like, there's certain types, like, yeah, that's definitely a Jon Arryn thing, although that also begs the question, what the hell happened to Robert then?
Yeah, that's true. Well, I think a lot of it comes down to nature as well. And it is funny because Ned had this brief stint as Hand of the King, and that just does seem to set up this reputation for the Starks as the most honorable. But then you also have like the northern system of like honor and ethics, which we're going to get to on a panel on Sunday about
afternoon.
Northern justice and guest right, and how it seems to me it's like more of a system of honor, like this code that everybody abides by or should abide by, and then down south it gets to be like a little bit more individual. But yes.
But it's not a generalized code, it's insular to each house. So if you compare their honor or their actions to the narrative that's been pushed down these people's throats per house, you could quantify that and qualify it, saying that it is honorable within the narrative that they're doing. And is Ned Stark really trying to save these kids, or is he just trying to correct the narrative of what everyone would be like, ooh, what happened to those kids getting bashed against, something and killed brutally? Does he really want to save the Baratheon children, or does he just not want it to be bad? So like Ned's actions seem to be based on like, oh well, if somebody quietly kills them in their sleep, that's sad. But they were bastards and blah blah blah, whatever. But like,
He seemed to
does
have.
not want the narrative to keep repeating in a certain way.
Okay, so the comment is you feel like honor is very specific, house to house to house, region to region, and I think I would mostly agree with that on the surface. And your other question is Ned actually trying to be honorable in his quest to save children, or is it a knee-jerk reaction to his past traumas? Is that what I'm reading? Okay. I think that's a really, really interesting question, and George does tend to write a lot about psychology in a very subtle way, without forcing it down anybody's throat. But Ned has PTSD over some stuff.
Sure.
I mean, most people in Westeros probably do, if we're honest. And I also very much agree with the idea that honor is determined by the perceiver. I mean, it's relativity theory for my physics people out there. The observer determines the frame of reference. And you're right. Tywin shoved family first down his family's throat. So what he would consider honorable is the things that, the things he expects his children to do to better the family. The Starks are going to have a different perception of that. The Tullys are going to have a different perception of that. Family, duty, honor being third place on their list.
Yeah.
I always find it very interesting that duty and honor are considered mutually exclusive, and that enough that they have to be set aside. Like some people might say duty is honor, And I like House Tully. I'm just going to say that too.
I think she might have dishonorable duty. I mean, like the Boltons would not be very, they might be dutiful in their task orders, but not very honorable.
Amethyst Empress.
Do you think that the idea of he who passes the sentence must swing the sword is a good example of northern honor?
Yeah, we don't really see that with a lot of other.
So the question is,
Sorry.
he who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Is that a good example of northern honor? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, Bran, I think, when he sees that, he's like, oh, it's our way is the old way, and there's definitely a certain aspect of it, like certain old ways that the Starks are supposed to be considered because they are the old gods and they are the first men. So I think that would definitely be an example because we see a lot of houses that actually have their own executioners and bodyguards and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I also think it's definitely an example of honor because if you're the person who's deciding to sentence this person to death, then you should own that action and take responsibility for that and swing the sword yourself. That's definitely under a category of honor, and I think it's interesting because it's very honorable in a very personal sense, but then it also ties into that public perception piece that you were talking about too, Stephen, because it's actually a mantra that they have that gets passed down through House Stark or the North at large. So I don't know. What do you think, you guys? Should we open this up to other characters aside from
Stannis, Jaime, and Ned?
Yeah, or we can talk about Stannis and Jaime and Ned some more, but maybe we could talk about women and honor like you were talking about earlier.
Yes.
I don't know any honorable women.
I'm going to strangle you with this. Yeah, I think it's very interesting because I think Catelyn is a very, very interesting example of this because she has her own sort of code, and she's actually kind of brutal in a lot of ways. Like and I hate saying that because so many people shit on Catelyn so much, and
Catelyn Stark did nothing wrong.
Yes. But she has her own little sense thing. Like she really struggles with her for instance her obligations towards Robb as her king, for instance, and her role as a mother and everything. I really find that one of the most interesting moral crossroads is when Catelyn does decide to let Jaime Lannister go free, because she has her own code as a mother. That she if you think about it, nobody else was really looking out for Arya and Sansa in that setting because they were considered less valuable and everything, and she was the only one who seemed to give a crap. And even Robb after a while said after he found out about the Tyrion marriage was I should have traded for the girls because then we could have maybe gotten the Tyrells. Even then he's thinking of it in terms of being a king, not really in terms of being a brother. But Catelyn is family first, so she's following her ethics as a mother and her own sort of code in that respect, and that's a really important. I think that's a really important thing that people leave out of the conversation is family obligation.
And Catelyn actually saw the honor in Jaime when they had their discussion.
Mm-hmm.
She, when he was kind of defending himself with all the problems with Oath, she recognized that when let go, he would actually follow through.
Yes, exactly. And she also saw the honorable knight in Brienne when everybody was writing her off as a joke. And I think that takes a certain woman's courage, shall we say?
Yes.
I think that takes a courage that's genderless, to be honest with you. Brienne, I would agree, is an incredibly honorable character.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
When she makes a promise, when she makes up her mind to do something, you can take it to the bank that she is going to do it or die.
Try.
And
how many people here think Brienne is unequivocally honorable?
Okay, that's
everybody.
most of the hands in the room for those of you who are listening to the audio afterwards. Pretty much the whole room.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Just the end of my thought is that it's really interesting to see a female character struggling with honor as defined in a patriarchal society, trying to force herself into a traditionally masculine role and be honorable in that. It's, again, George is just a genius at what he does, because if you read the books especially, you get into her mind and you see things like the way she feels about Nimble Dick Crab and how it breaks her heart when he dies, when she realized, oh, he was really just a good guy and I couldn't trust him. You know, I guess that's a little off topic of honor.
Justice for Nimble Dick.
Oh, it's a huge topic. And what I also find what just really grips my heart about Brienne and her concept of honor is that I don't think it's just honor and duty, but love. She swears oaths to people who accept her for who she is and who might give her love. And that's something that she hasn't had enough of in her life. And it just breaks my heart. You know, she swears herself to Renly because he danced with her at that ball in Tarth. And then Catelyn, because she kind of looks at her as a daughter. She kind of gives her mother's love, and Brienne never knew her mother. And then, well, Jaime, of course. And yeah, I just think about how honorable Brienne is, but also how a lot of her oaths are sworn to people that she wants love from.
I really love like her crisis of conscience when it comes to Lady Stoneheart too. You know what I mean? Like that. Like like I'm waiting for it to like fully sink in with her, where she's like, you know, Lady Stoneheart and Lady Catelyn are not the same.
Yeah, and that's why I know that there's a popular theory in the fandom that Arya will kill Lady Stoneheart, but I like thinking about Brienne having to come to this crisis where perhaps she'll be put in a position to kill Lady Stoneheart or not kill her. And then she has all these parallels with Jaime, and he's had to break some oaths to do what was best for the greater good. And will she have to do the same? And will that person, like, will her Ares be Lady Stoneheart? I don't know. It's just a little pet theory or something that I like to turn over in my mind. But yeah, any other? So maybe let's talk about Sansa Stark.
This should be uncontroversial.
Well, I find
Sansa Stark did nothing wrong.
Oh, of course not. But what I find really interesting about Sansa is that she has had this grooming and this tutelage by some of the worst, most dishonorable people in the whole game, Cersei and Littlefinger.
And she still fights it every step of the way.
Yeah, so how will she take those lessons and not be, poisoned by the worst parts of them?
I would like to make an observation in that, her upbringing was under Ned and under Catelyn, who most of us will agree are at least mostly honorable. But the most dishonorable things that Sansa does in the story are very early on.
Yeah.
When she has only that teaching, and then as she has people like Littlefinger and Cersei and others like that around her who are showing her the dishonorable way, she's learning to be more honorable from it.
Yeah, she's seeing the value of it. Like, she totally rejects. It's always amazes me when people say, well, she's Cersei 2.0. Like, every time Cersei talks to her, she goes, no. Like, you're wrong. And it's so interesting because she does, when she does actually is able to take some agency, like, I really think her actions in the Vale are very interesting, but she actually does not only adhere to certain codes of honor and, like, look up to codes of honor, like her organizing the Knights tournament and everything. She's also teaching it. She's teaching it to Sweet Robin, too. Like, you look at Sweet Robin and what a selfish little shit he is when we first meet him. And then he's with Sansa. Sansa becomes his mother, basically. And after, a few months of being Sansa as his mother, all of a sudden, like, she tells him, like, you just offended me, or you dishonor me by giving me a bastard or something like that. And he's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I don't want to do anything bad. I love you, blah, blah, blah. Like, his selfish behavior stops. So she's not only is she, like, living up to the honorable code more as the story on, she's passing it on already.
Yeah, what's funny about, and maybe this is getting a little bit too off topic, but one of my favorite observations about Sweet Robin was made by Eliana of Girls Gone Canon fame. And she says that Robin he's kind of like an expression of Lysa's id, like her subconscious and all her pent-up frustration and everything over her terrible past. I mean, her father forced her into having an abortion, and Hoster Tully was not a great father at all. He was horrible. So despite the whole family duty honor thing, there is definitely a lot of dishonor in House Tully if you look at some of the things that Hoster Tully has done. And I just think about how that has molded Lysa, and thinking about that expression of her feelings in Sweet Robin, and then how Sansa has to tame that. That is really interesting to me. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I find Sansa, mommy Sansa, is one of the most interesting things.
Oh yeah, okay. So, Stephen, are you saying that we should open it up for
Yeah, I
questions?
think so.
Yeah, okay.
We've got 15 minutes left, so
Oh my
I want to
goodness.
make sure that everybody out there has a chance to have their say too.
All right.
Unless you're not done.
No, that was my final idea.
Right on.
On Sansa. So, questions?
I saw the blue hat.
So one of the things I think about honor a lot in Westeros is just the idea of not just what's happening now, but like the memory of our house, the legacy. Like Tywin talks about it a lot. Like basically his code of honor is whatever is good for survival of our house is what's honorable. So I'm just curious, how much do you think the characters are actually motivated by that, or is it really more about really what's going on at the time? Like they don't actually.
I think that's going to vary from character to character, to be honest with you. And your question or your comment was, excuse me, that you're wondering how much the characters are motivated by the history of honor in their house versus what they feel is maybe right in the moment. Is that correct? Okay.
And survival.
And survival. And I think it is going to vary largely from character to character and from house to house. But there is this idea that 1,000 years of honorable service to your house, to your liege lord, can be undone by one member of your house doing the wrong thing. I mean, I'm a book first person, but we'll go to the show for a second. Who likes the Glovers at the end? Screw those guys. We stood behind House Stark for 1,000 years, except for that one time last week. And then when the Night King comes, we're not going to show up again.
They're not showing up after all.
It's generational too, though, right? Like it's the kids or the younger people in both the show and the book look at that legacy, the narrative of their houses completely different than the older generation, which like kind of thematic throughout the series, right? The older people are more into buying that. Like you don't see that as much with like Sansa or Arya. They're not pushing like what Ned is as far as the house legacy. But an age thing, kids just don't have the foresight to see.
No. What about Bran?
I mean,
Bran thinks about how whenever the slightest he thinks about after I think it was it the Littles. It was one of the Littles left him cakes and stuff like that, and he said he was going to come back someday and pay them back with tenfold
Hundredfold for every berry and nut. Yeah.
So it really does vary from character to character. Our friend. Well, she doubted doing it for a while too. She fought against it at first. It wasn't until she found out about the threat of the Night's King that she actually decided to go ahead with that.
So let's get another question.
okay, over here we had a question.
Hi, I actually wanted to go back to Sansa for just a second, but so you sort of have the rest of the main Stark POVs in the book that we can see are maybe going in directions not so honorable, or John might come back different. Bran is working into Hodor.
Arya.
Is learning to be an assassin. Whereas we see Sansa sort of going on the opposite track, where she started out sort of not. She was, she lied about Joffrey and all that stuff. She's going the other way. Do you think she's just going to continue on that upward trajectory, or do you see a point where Sansa might have to make
Ooh.
sort of decision.
Okay, so
Yeah,
Honorable or not honorable.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So the question is, we see the other Stark children who have done some perhaps dishonorable things in their arcs, and they're continuing to do so. And will Sansa maybe do something dishonorable and then have to come back from that?
I think she's going to do some things that are going to be a little bit morally gray, but are going to be understandable. Like, I think she learned a lot more from her father than people give her credit for. I think she's going to be a little more of a consequentialist than Ned was, but I think she's going to do things like perhaps for the greater good.
I think she's already done her worst morally gray stuff, and I think her arc. I mean, I hope, because I'm a fansa.
I love it.
I think her arc is going to be a lot about defining what honor means to her, what her path forward is.
Our friend with glasses?
So you touched on very briefly about the concept of a Sharadane being dishonored. I just wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about the concept of sexuality.
Sexual purity.
Oh,
Cersei
man.
is not punished for any of her actual misdeeds. She's not punished for killing anyone. She's not punished for raping Lancel, really. Nobody cares that Lancel is underage and vulnerable. Nobody cares that... No, she was put on that shame walk for having sex outside of marriage. The only thing that was the official punishment, not even for adultery against Robert, real adultery against Robert, but having sex after he died. Like, the perceptions of honor for women in Westeros are complete bullshit. There's no actual code of ethics in there. It's all about keeping the vagina locked up. Like, it's complete bullshit.
Shakes, you have anything to say on that?
I actually kind of missed the question. Can one of you restate it?
Okay, the question is, like...
Speak about female honor in relation to sex.
Yeah,
Right.
Like how
Oh, okay.
Sharadane was
All right.
dishonored.
Yeah, Ashara Dane was dishonored by a Stark.
Yeah,
and-
I think that Wendy summed it up pretty well. That is,
Yeah,
is
I'm not-
bullshit.
I'm not touching that, Emma.
It's kind of weird because it. Go ahead.
Lawless,
Oh, right, Lawless.
Lawless, so gorgeous.
she was treated like a pile of trash.
Right.
It was nothing that she did intentionally.
Yeah,
Well,
after
she didn't do
Lawless is
anything.
gang raped, and then
Nobody wants her after that.
Yeah, I think how Tyrion talks about Lawless is utterly disgusting. Like, people talk about Sansa's superficial for not liking Tyrion. Excuse me, but he it was literally the threat of Lawless.
Hey, y'all read Tyrion's chapters again. He's not very likable.
He's not a good person at all. He's
and
a shit. he's
it's
a
funny
shithole.
because when characters in Westeros talk about rape, they often talk of men dishonoring women, and
Yeah,
that's
there's
a
no dishonor
euphemism
for the man in it.
Right,
It's
right.
crazy.
And that falls on the woman. So
I mean, look at Barbary Dustin. And you actually look at some of the things Barbary Dustin actually does, and she's the only one who actually, like, kind of protects Jane Poole for a little while. I mean, sure, she ultimately gives her up to be put on the slaughtering ground, the Ramsay slaughtering ground, but she's the only one who actually, like, shows some concern for this girl until the Spearwives show up, basically. And and she has, like, very good legitimate gripes with the Starks. Like, if you actually look at her reasonings for why she doesn't like the Starks, it makes perfect sense to me. Like, I get it. I'm a huge Stark fan, but I totally get behind Barbary Dustin and why she doesn't like the Starks.
Think
absolutely.
front.
What?
We'll talk later. I think Barbary Dustin's hate for the Starks is a front for the Grand Northern Conspiracy. Who's with me?
Yeah.
Anyone?
Okay.
Anyone?
Yeah,
okay. I got a couple people
Do you
out
think she
there.
wrote the pink letter, though?
No.
Any other questions? Yes.
So I think that, like, duels historically has been used to, like, defend your honor and things like that. But I feel like in Westeros it's sort of turned on its head because it's sort of, as trial by combat is a way to, like, it's like an institutional loophole to get out of any dishonorable thing that you've done.
Yeah, nobody thinks Braun is honorable.
Okay, so the statement is that there's a sort of a history of using duels to settle matters of honor, but a trial by combat is really like a rigged system because...
It is.
Right, might is right. And if you're a commoner, even if you get trial by combat, you're still going to die because you've never swung a sword, you've never held a sword in your life, and you're about to fight somebody who's trained their entire life.
Yeah, bringing up duels just, oh man, that opens up its own can of worms because you can focus on the trial by combat portion, and you can also think about Oberyn versus the Mountain and that whole duel, and thinking about
And which
Oberyn's.
which one of them is honorable?
Right, and thinking about Oberyn's quest for revenge, and even
How
though that
Doran's
was
quest for
to,
revenge.
yeah, and is that honorable?
I think, by the way, just warning, Doran is a piece of shit. Sorry.
So,
Yeah, he's not the best.
coming to Con of Thrones 2020, a panel about dueling.
Doran being a piece of shit.
Right, so, is revenge dishonorable when you're fighting for the honor of your family? It's a good
Yeah,
question.
nobody like sticks up for Elia, which is why I'm like, even though Oberyn doesn't.
Oberyn
really,
does.
Well, yeah, exactly. But he's like seems like the only person who does. Yeah.
Okay, we've got 5 minutes left. Last chance for questions, comments, anything?
Yes.
Brienne.
I was going to chew on that one a little bit longer, but I can't argue.
Is Sam Turley honorable?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
He rigged the election for John?
Yeah,
Okay. I mean, that's a good point.
But
Now. So my
he
answer
was
is.
honest to people about it, though.
Here's
He
the
was honest
thing.
about it.
He's on. Well, actually, I would say he's honorable because it's not public knowledge.
Yeah.
So the public perception of him is that
But the old gods know.
He doesn't worship the old god, so it's fine.
Well, I don't know. He took his oath
Oh, that's
before
true.
a
That's true.
tree.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
I feel like I just stepped in some poo there.
and we'll see what happens going forward if, in the books if he also becomes Sam the Stealer of Heartsbane, and how that looks on. I don't
Better
know.
than it did on the show.
He's totally. You think so?
I think
it's
so.
going to be only show.
No, I think it will be
Oh, okay.
a little bit smoother than they did it on the show.
Probably,
But
yeah.
he said surprising no one.
Shocking. All right, we have. I think one more person had a question. Yes,
In the back.
I feel like there's a really thin line between honor and pride. And I was wondering, especially in the TV show, I felt like some of these characters weren't necessarily as honorable as they were made out to be. They were probably more prideful. I don't know what your thoughts were.
Well,
This is a great question. The fan asked about the thin line between honor and pride, and I think that's really interesting, especially when we look at some characters that maybe are less likely to be favorites in the honorable realm, like maybe Tywin Lannister. I definitely think he has a lot of pride, and he.
well, look what he did to his. I think what he did to his father's mistress, and then the way Kevin contextualizes that with what happens to Cersei. It's very interesting in terms of the pride, because Tywin he thinks Tywin would have done it, and it's like, no, Tywin never would have done that because Cersei is a Lannister.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very important thing with the Lannisters in particular.
I love your observation, by the way. I think you're spot on. And I think you're right to go to Tywin first in examining that.
Yeah, his face just came right in front of my face.
Because nobody here is going to raise their hand who is Tywin unequivocally honorable? No, but he's still held up in Westeros as an example to be followed.
And that's a stupid idea.
Well,
It's stupid.
he gets results, and to
By-
that
because of
society,
luck.
that might be its own kind of honor. We're not going to call him honorable, but nobody in Westeros is calling him dishonorable, even after the reigns of Castamere and all of that. But he did all of that because of his pride.
Is that more because people are afraid of him, or because? Yeah, I think that's more people.
Maybe a little column A, a little column B.
Yeah, even going back to Ned, I don't know. I think it's interesting if we didn't have Ned's point of view, if we didn't see the story unfold through his point of view. Characters on the outside looking in might even say that Ned had a lot of pride around his honor and his values.
They do say that about him. They do say that about him.
Oh,
they
sure.
call him the Cold Wolf.
Yeah, I know they do.
Yeah.
They might continue to do so.
And Tyrion has like a thought about like Sansa's proud, stiff, Stark knees, and like there's definitely a perception of Stark pride overall.
Yeah. And I think that's because honor is, even though we try to define it and we try to say who is unequivocally honorable and all of that, it is still such a personal thing, and what honor means to different characters can vary so much. And of course, and when it's going to come down to personal values, it's also going to come down to personal flaws too, like honor or like pride. and revenge, all of that. So I think that we are wrapping up.
Yes, we are out of time.
That's it.
So you can find me. My name is Lauren.
Hey.
I go by at ShakespeareofThrones on Twitter.
George just walked in. I wanted
Oh.
to say hi to George. In the
Hi,
back there.
George. Yeah, and you can find me on Twitter. I'm at the Wendy Nerd on Twitter. I posted a picture of the three of us. My head is enormous.
And I'm Steven Stark at StarkStark74 on Twitter and YouTube. Steven Stark. See you there.
Thank you for being a great
Thanks for
audience.
coming, everyone.